By the spring of 1945, Berlin was already dying. 3 million civilians were trapped inside a city that Allied bombers had been destroying for 2 years. The streets were filled with rubble. The water supply was failing. Food was running out. 55 feet beneath the Reich Chancellery, in an 18-room concrete shelter known as the Führer Bunker, Adolf Hitler was still giving orders. He had retreated underground in January 1945 as Soviet forces crossed into Germany from the east. He refused to leave. He refused to surrender. He moved armies on maps that no longer existed. Outside the city, Colonel General Gotthard Heinrici had been given an impossible task: defend Berlin with an army of ghosts. His forces were depleted, exhausted, and massively outnumbered. But Heinrici was a master of defensive warfare, and he had one advantage: he knew exactly where the blow was coming from. On March 29, 1945, a 17-year-old boy named Helmut Altner was called up to fight. He had been in training for less than 3 weeks when the largest artillery barrage in history began. At 5 in the morning on April 16, 1945, Marshal Georgy Zhukov unleashed 1 million artillery shells on the German positions east of Berlin. The barrage was so loud that windows shattered 40 miles away. The ground shook for minutes at a time. It was meant to destroy everything in its path. It didn't. Heinrici had predicted the attack. He had already pulled his men back from the front lines into the fortified ridgeline of the Silo Heights, the last strong defensive position before the German capital. Zhukov's million shells had landed on empty trenches. From his command post, Heinrici watched the Soviet advance begin and watched it slow. The Silo Heights rose 60 meters above the surrounding plain. Every road to Berlin passed through it, and his men were waiting. For 4 days, from April 16th to April 19th, Zhukov threw wave after wave of men and tanks at the heights. Nearly 1 million Soviet soldiers against 100,000 Germans. The cost was catastrophic. Over 30,000 Soviet soldiers died in 4 days. Helmut Altner was in those trenches. He later wrote, "We are in a vast cauldron. In front of us, around us, and behind us is an enveloping hell. The explosions go on and on. Our ears have long since been deafened. Hardly anyone speaks." On April 19th, the Silo line finally broke. The road to Berlin lay open. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin watched the battle with cold calculation. He had assembled the greatest concentration of military force in history. 2.5 million soldiers, 6,000 tanks, 8,000 aircraft. But he was not going to give any single general the glory of taking Berlin alone. Stalin had deliberately drawn the boundary line between Zhukov's First Belarusian Front and Marshal Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front, and stopped it 50 miles short of Berlin. The message was clear. Both men could race for the city. Both men had everything to lose if they came second. Zhukov drove his men with terrifying ferocity. Konev advanced from the south with equal ruthlessness. Reports later emerged that in their desperation to reach the Reichstag first, the two Soviet fronts had opened fire on each other. Casualties were a secondary concern. Speed was everything. On April 23, 1945, Zhukov's forces entered Berlin from the north. Konev's forces pushed in from the south. 2 days later, on April 25th, the ring closed completely. Berlin was surrounded. 3 million civilians and the last remnants of Hitler's army were trapped inside. On the same day, April 25th, 1945, Soviet and American troops met at the Elbe River near the town of Torgau. Nazi Germany had been cut in two. There was no relief coming. there was no escape. The Germans had a name for what happened next. Rattenkrieg, the War of Rats, street by street, building by building, floor by floor. Soviet artillery fired 1,000 shells at a single city block. Entire neighborhoods were leveled in hours. Helmut Altner fought in the Berlin subway tunnels, in the ruins of the Olympic Stadium, in the streets of Spandau. Of the company of 17-year-olds he served with, he would become one of only 2 survivors. 3 million civilians hid in basements and underground railway stations as the city collapsed above them. Food, water, electricity, and medical care had all but disappeared. People lived in darkness, listening to the battle move closer, room by room. For German soldiers, there was no safe retreat. SS execution squads moved through the city, hanging deserters from lamp posts and bridges. Signs were placed around their necks. I was a coward. The message was clear: death in battle or death at the hands of your own side. By April 27th, Berlin was completely cut off from the outside world. Soviet forces were less than 15 miles from the city center, and in his bunker beneath the ruins, Adolf Hitler had finally accepted that the war was lost. The Führer bunker was a labyrinth of concrete and steel, 55 feet underground, with its own water supply, electrical generators, and medical facilities. It had been designed to survive anything. By late April 1945, it had become a tomb. Shortly after midnight on April 29th, 1945, Hitler summoned a city official named Walter Wagner into his private conference room. With Soviet artillery shaking the walls above, Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun were married. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. Goebbels and Bormann served as witnesses. Afterward, Hitler dictated his last will and testament to his secretary, Traudl Junge. He appointed Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. He blamed the Jews for the war. He expressed no regret. Then he went to bed. On the afternoon of April 30th, 1945, Hitler and Eva Braun said goodbye to the remaining staff of the bunker. At approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, those waiting outside heard a single gunshot. When they entered the room, they found Hitler slumped against a table. Eva Braun was beside him on a sofa, her knees drawn up. She had bitten down on a cyanide capsule. Hitler had shot himself in the right temple. Their bodies were carried up the stairs and into the garden of the Reich Chancellery. Doused in petrol, they were set alight, while Soviet artillery shells fell around them. It took hours for the fire to burn completely. Hitler had been 56 years old. On April 30th, 1945, the same afternoon Hitler died, Soviet soldiers raised the red banner over the Reichstag building. The image was photographed, staged, and restaged for propaganda, but the meaning was real. The symbol of Nazi power had fallen. At 6 in the morning on May 2nd, 1945, General Helmut Weidling, commander of the Berlin defense area, crossed the front lines and surrendered the city to Soviet General Vasily Zhukov. The fighting inside Berlin was over. Helmut Altner was not there to see it. On the morning the city surrendered, he had joined a desperate breakout attempt to the west. Soldiers and civilians together running through Soviet lines. It became a bloodbath. Altner was wounded. He was captured near the town of Brandenburg on May 3rd, 1945. Across Berlin, German soldiers emerged from basements, ruins, and subway tunnels with their hands raised. Hundreds of thousands walked into Soviet captivity. For most of them, the war had not ended. It had simply changed form. For the first time in weeks, the guns fell silent. Berlin was a ruin. An estimated 22,000 soldiers and 22,000 civilians had died inside the city during the battle alone. The streets were empty. The smoke was still rising. The Battle of Berlin lasted 16 days, from April 16th to May 2nd, 1945. In those 16 days, 80,000 Soviet soldiers were killed and over 280,000 wounded. German military losses exceeded 300,000. The city itself was almost completely destroyed. For the survivors, the end of the battle was not the end of the suffering. Berlin's 3 million civilians emerged from the ruins into a city without food, water, or shelter. The reconstruction of Germany would take decades. The division of Berlin into East and West would last 44 years. On June 24th, 1945, Marshal Georgy Zhukov rode a white horse across Red Square in Moscow at the Victory Parade, the man who had taken Berlin. Within months, Stalin, wary of his popularity, had removed him from power. Zhukov was sent to command a distant military district far from Moscow. Glory in the Soviet Union was always temporary. Helmut Altner spent 18 months as a Soviet prisoner of war. He survived. He later worked for decades as a journalist in Paris. His diary, written by a 17-year-old boy in the ruins of a dying empire, was published in 1948 and remains one of the most important eyewitness accounts of the battle ever written. The Third Reich had promised to last 1,000 years. It lasted 12. In the end, it was destroyed in 16 days by the largest military force ever assembled in human history, in the ruins of the city where it began.